Well, we must well get right off the bat that is Remmel's Tony sitting right there, and we've all touched it, and see, yeah, it moves and everything, and it's pretty exciting. Thank you guys for being here today to join us for our conversation about Memphis. And Skip, thanks to you and to the Clinton School for making this conversation possible, as you guys have done now for several years. It's a big deal for us to be here, and we really appreciate everything that you're doing for the Rep and for our community as you guys kick off your new semester. We're very glad to be here. We're honored to be here. So thank you for being here. I want to begin by asking each of our panel members to introduce themselves, and we'll start down there with a man who needs no introduction.
I'm Rimmel Dickinson.
Will you use the mic there, because they'll record this too?
Are we in working order?
We are good.
Well, I'm Rimmel Dickinson. I was born and raised in Little Rock and had a full career in Washington, D.C., initially with Senator J.W. Fulbright, and finished my work with the government and found my new love, which is Broadway. And I came early in my Broadway career to Memphis. And I will say the show won the Tony Award because it's so wonderful. And I'm so proud that it's here in Little Rock, finally. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, everyone. How are you today? Good. My name is Brent DeRoma. I play Huey in our amazing production of Memphis, born in Florida, and very happy to be visiting Arkansas.
Hi, Lynn Curzio-Formato. I'm the director and choreographer of this production of Memphis, and I'm thrilled to be back. I've done 6 shows now at the Rep, so I love Arkansas, and I'm so happy to be back.
Hi, I'm Jasmine Richardson, and I play Felicia in the show. And I have to say that Arkansas has the nicest people I've ever met. So I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Jasmine. I'm Marvin Schwartz. I know some of you. I'm a Little Rock-based author, and my newest book, which came out yesterday, is about Arkansas and the Memphis influence in the same time. In Newport, Arkansas, yes.
I have the book right here. It's entitled We Want a Boogie, The Rockabilly Roots of Sonny Burgess and the Pacers. And Marvin will be making this book available right after our conversation today, and you'll want to check it out. We also want to thank our friends at the Butler Center, because they're one of our partners on this project, particularly as we get to these conversations and providing context and historic context. Because one of the things that's always very important when we produce plays at the Rep is connecting to our community and finding that connective tissue that not just illuminates a play for 2 hours, but illuminates that story and resonates in our lives here in Arkansas. And this musical, Memphis, really does that. And we're going to talk. We're so glad that Marvin's here. We're so glad of our partnership with the Butler Center, because that's helped us. That conversation has helped us understand what this play means beyond the 2 hours that we enjoy it on our stage. I want to kick our conversation off today by asking Rimmel to talk a little bit about the origins of this musical and how his involvement and how the play was created.
When you see this wonderful show, you're going to hear a new word in your dictionary. It's hockadoo, and that just means all things are sensational. And it's one of Huey Calhoun's trademark expressions. But the Hockadoo Company, as we called it, was formed January 9th, 2008. The show began developmental productions in La Jolla, California, at the La Jolla Playhouse. It had its first preview on Broadway, October 19th, 2009. We played through the long winter in a very competitive marketplace, and were nominated with $1 Million Quartet, American Idiot, Fela, and Memphis. And it was a real horse race, but the golden day came and we won the award. 4 awards: Best Musical of the Year, Best Score, written by David Bryan, whom you say, now who is that? You would recognize him immediately. He is the keyboard player of the Bon Jovi band. And he has these blonde ringlets. You always see him in the back, and you've seen him. He's a brilliant musician and songwriter. The playwright Joe DiPietro is a superb writer. This all came out of his head, inspired very much by the Memphis disc jockey, Dewey Phillips, exactly. So just by way of, I would just say that we closed on Broadway after 3 years, Sunday, August 5th, 1,166 performances and 30 previews. We were the 83rd longest running show in Broadway history, surpassing Cabaret by one performance. Wow. But I am happy to say the show is still out there. We're beginning a third year of touring North America, but nothing is more special than an independent production staged by a superb regional theater like the Arkansas Repertory Theater. Thank you.
Thank you, Rimmel. Rimmel alluded to the storyline of Memphis. And I want to say, yes, there is an anchor in our history with this musical that revolves around the white DJ, Dewey Phillips, who had a radio station in Memphis for many years, beginning in the early 1950s. But I want to be real clear about two things. One, this play is primarily a fictional spin on a real live person. And, as Rimmel pointed out, it's original music. This is a piece of musical theater. It's not what we call a jukebox musical, where they take songs of an era and create a story around them. That would be the other show that Rimmel was referring to, $1 Million Quartet, which takes shows of the era and tells a story. Memphis is really from the genre of musical theater. When the characters have that heightened sense of emotion that the only way they can express themselves is through song, that's what they do. And so the wonderful score is original to the Memphis story. Now, Marvin is here as a scholar and as an author of this new book, and we're talking about history, we're talking about the fact that Memphis is grounded in actual events, even though its storyline is a fantasy, a spin-off of those actual events. But Marvin, could you kind of set the frame for us historically here in Little Rock, here in Arkansas, and in Memphis? What was the music scene like? What was the radio scene like in the early 1950s?
Sure. Is this working? Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I'll express myself in a song, but it's a book, so
okay.
You'll just have to read that. In Memphis, this play is set in 1951. Correct?
Starts in 51.
51. And so we have a very vibrant time in communication technology. What's going on is new radio stations, particularly the black-owned radio station of WDAI, the first all-black station in the nation, is reaching out across the Mississippi Delta, reaching about 20% of the African-American community in the nation from Memphis. And because of the topography, the flatland of the river, it has a broad reach. There is a new sound in the air. Black rhythm and blues is coming into prominence. Singers like Joe Turner, Louis Jordan is very popular, Winona Harris, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, a couple of Arkansans, are influencing the sound waves. The urban density of people moving off the farms, creating a lot of new energy on the radio waves. Black DJs are coming into prominence, and white DJs are copying them because that's where the action is, that's where the fun is, that's where young people are buying records, and that's what's driving the entire industry, who's buying records. And so in Memphis was a DJ named Dewey Phillips, and he had a show called Red, White, and Blue, and he spoke in a patter that was much like the black DJs. Some of the black DJs were B.B. King. His show was called BB's GB's. And then they are on WDAI, Princess High Stuff, and it's really funny names and exciting characters who spoke in a great dialect. Dewey Phillips did the same things, and introducing music that was crossover, because white girls were dancing to it. that was big time. They were going across the river from Memphis to the Plantation Inn in West Memphis, dancing, and these were all black bands. So there was an interesting start to the civil rights movement at this time. All evidence through the sounds and the radio.
And among the artists that Dewey Phillips introduced to America was a young man from Mississippi.
A young white boy who sang very much like a black singer and was often confused. And we're talking, of course, about Elvis, whose breakthrough hit was That's All Right, taken from That's All Right Mama by Arthur Crudup. And when that song hit the airwaves, Sam Phillips recorded it, rushed it over to Dewey. Memphis went crazy. The phone calls were ringing at the studio. They sent out a search. Elvis was at a movie that afternoon. They got him out of the movie theater. Dewey Phillips got him on the phone and asked him the very important question, what high school did you attend in Memphis? Because the high school would identify if Elvis was white or black. And there were segregated schools. And he answered, I think it was called Hunter, I don't recall the exact high school, but that distinguished for the audience that this was a white boy singing in a black style. Very interesting moment.
And speaking of the historic Dewey Phillips, many of you may know Tom Bonner, who lives here in Little Rock. Well, Tom worked with Dewey Phillips in Memphis in the 1950s. And Tom took a few minutes to tell us a story about Dewey Phillips, which we will listen to right now.
Well, in 1958, there were two huge rock radio stations in Memphis, WMPS and WHBQ. I was a disc jockey on WHBQ with four other guys, one of them named Dewey Phillips, a crazy man, an absolutely insane guy whom everybody loved. Dewey had no boundaries, and he had no filters. He didn't have filters on his mouth. He didn't have boundaries about where he went, what he did, what he said. And he didn't have boundaries about what music he played. So he was on from 9 to midnight, and his show was geared to young people. So the radio station management didn't mind that he was so off the wall, because the kids just loved him. And so he played things like, he'd grab he'd grab a 78 RPM record by Mahalia Jackson of some really rockin' spiritual that nobody had ever heard. And he'd just get you crazy about it. Young people loved it. They'd start dancing to it. And then he'd get some new guy like nobody ever heard of from his cousin's recording company, Sun Records. His cousin was Sam Phillips. He'd get somebody like a guy named Elvis Presley and play them on the air for the first time. And the kid, now talk about going crazy about it. Phones would blow off the wall. He made Elvis a known person in Memphis, and it didn't take long for him to be known worldwide. Obviously, the rest of that is history. So I was right in the middle of all that, and music had changed and morphed from rhythm and blues and pop, melding the two into that thing called rock and roll. And it was new in the 50s, and we didn't know at the moment how big it was going to be, or how big and iconic the 1950s were going to be. But it was such a magic time. And to be in Memphis, Tennessee, which was the epicenter of that movement of rock and roll, with Sun Records and all that that implies, and to be in the radio station where it all started, and to be friends with the man, Dewey Phillips, who truly started it all when he said, here's a young man named Elvis Presley, and flipped the switch. That was just, as I look back on it, that was just the most wonderful time in my life. And I'm so proud and pleased to have been there. I think Dewey Phillips was such a unique individual, so different from any other human you ever met before or ever will meet in the future. And the fact that his decisions got this thing really started, and I believe he really did get it started. He was heard all over the Mid-South, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Tennessee by all the kids. I think those things alone make him a moment and a person in history that warranted a Broadway show and a show at the Rep. So I got to tell you this. This show, Memphis, which I have not seen, I'm very excited about seeing. And I would think that anybody who likes the 50s music, or who had a grandfather who was there in the 50s, or who might, for heaven's sake, be as old as I am and have been there themselves, or anything in between that, I think they'd all be interested in seeing this show Memphis, because that's what it's all about. I'm looking forward to it.
Very cool, very cool. Now let's talk a little bit about how this production is coming to life at Arkansas Rep. And Rem mentioned the tour. There's been tours all around us, but the show has never played in Central Arkansas. So this is the regional premiere of Memphis, and we were thrilled when we got a call saying, hey, from the folks who were controlling the rights in New York called us up last year and said, hey, would you guys be interested in producing Memphis? Having seen it in New York and having seen it with Rem in Memphis at its premiere in Memphis, I jumped at the opportunity. A little intimidating. It's a big deal show, but I remember calling Rimmel and talking about it, and he's been so helpful with us bringing this show to life. But let's talk about our creative team is here too. Brent, I'm going to start with you because we've been talking about Dewey Phillips, and you are playing Huey. Not to, just so it's not real. It's really Huey, not Dewey. Somebody said last night, well, who's Louie? What's it like to play this historic character, and how does the real Dewey Phillips influence what you're doing, or not at all?
Oh, I think he absolutely does. When I got here, I didn't know that much about the man, Dewey Phillips. But playing Huey Calhoun is very much a similar role. Huey is a wide-eyed sort of no-holds-bar human being, and uses the music that reaches him, which at the time was everything soul, rhythm, and blues, to unite people. And Huey's character falls in love with Miss Felicia Farrell, who is played by Jasmine Richardson. And Dewey Phillips, Huey is very much follows suit. So it's a whole lot of fun. You got to see the show to know any more.
And Jasmine, let me come back to you because now you have played this role before.
I have.
And how long were you playing it on tour?
I was on tour for 9 months. So
And-
that's a long time to get to know a character.
How do you keep, and I'll tell you, when you see the show, Huey and Jasmine, I just said it as if your name was Huey, Brad and Jasmine are on stage about 90% of the time. They don't get much of a break in this production.
99.999.
Yeah.
Brent definitely, absolutely.
And when they're off stage, they're changing clothes. And so how do you approach, is it different doing it at at a regional theater where you're in one place versus tour? And how do you keep at it? How do you keep it fresh? What is it that allows you to keep going?
Well, doing it on tour is very hard because you're in different climates. And as a singer, it's hard to adjust. So I had to figure out a way to kind of maintain a consistent show. But doing it sitting down, like at the Rep, is so much easier and so much more fun. I feel like I got to come into this process with a foundation already because I've done the show. But through Lynn, who's an incredible director, and working with Brent, who I love off stage and on stage, it's made it so much easier and smooth, and a lot of my choices that I make with Felicia, it's based off what I'm receiving from Brent. I'm not trying to redo what I've already done on stage on tour, because that was a different company. So I'm working with a whole new cast of talented, amazing people, and I'm just responding to that. Now, as a singer, I'm quiet most of the day. So you're catching me at a good time where I can talk, because I try to save it for the show, because I want to be 100% every time and consistent every time. But this show is a show that I love, and it's very close to my heart because I've been with Felicia for such a long period of time. And when I was given the opportunity to come back and do it, I mean, I had to say yes. I had to say yes. And I'm just honored, really, to be here and doing it at the Rep. So that's
Thank
me.
you. We're very glad to have you, too.
Happy to be here.
And let me turn over to our director choreographer. Lynn, this is your musical. This is as you mentioned, this is your 6th time at the Rep. You've been here as a director choreographer, as a choreographer. We're thrilled to have you back. Lynn is full-time on the faculty at Elon University, so we're pleased that they have loaned Lynn to us while her classes are continuing at the university. And Lynn, where do you start when you're going to tell this story? And what's the genesis of the creative process for you?
Well, before the show is cast, if the show has already been written, like a show like Memphis, it's not a new musical, the script and score are already intact and published. So I read the script, I listen to the music. For me, because I'm also a choreographer as well as a director, the music has always painted pictures in my head. Ever since I was 4 or 5 years old, if I listen to music, I see like what I could liken to an entire movie. So I basically take notes on the film that I'm watching in my head. And this happens when I read books as well. So the script, the score sit in front of me and I listen to the music. And then of course I start to do research on the time period, everything from, of course, in this show, the dances to the fashion to how people spoke. And then of course the particular person that it was based on, Dewey Phillips. And then I start to look for what I think might be the overriding message or theme of the show. Now, something else that's really important they always say that at least 50 to 90% depending who you're talking to, of good direction is casting. And in this particular case, I feel very blessed. We have a phenomenal cast, and they are all truly wonderful people. So I believe that to be true with this. At least 50% of my job was done when I found the wonderful cast.
Well, and you're right about that. I think it's 80.
Great. You see, I said it was a sliding scale between 50 to 90, so 80 fits right in there.
Yeah. Because really, I mean, it is true that when you're at the first read-through, you're either going, yes, or oh no. That's right. Well, I can say, with you guys, it was like, yes. I mean, I'll tell you what, I mean, when we had our first read-through and some of the cast sang at the first, with the musical it's different because they're still learning the music, so they sang a few songs and all of us on staff were thrilled. But since I'd been through the audition process, I knew we were going to be in great shape. And it's always a tense time when we're negotiating with agents and working with the actors to line up the cast that we want. And we're always thrilled when we get all of our first choices. And this was really a great, this ensemble. Really, it's a big cast for us. And the ensemble is really quite wonderful. They seem to really get along off stage. And they're wonderful on stage. And Lynn, you are the director-choreographer. We rarely at the Rep have a person whose job is both. Can you talk a little bit about that? What does that mean? What does a director-choreographer do that a director doesn't do that how do you the burden is really on you?
Well, a director-choreographer is responsible for every single moment in the show, blocking, choreography, the actor intention discussion with them. And of course, all the collaboration with every designer. If I were only choreographing, I would be following the lead of my director. And so part of what I might conceive as a choreographer would mutate based on the vision of the director. And the director would be responsible for things like being at this luncheon, for example. And, and I could have my nails done, but that's... But what is wonderful about being a director choreographer and why it actually evolved with people like Jerome Robbins and Bob Fosse is that you can rehearse a show in its entirety. You can seamlessly go from the dramatic action into the staging of a musical number, into the dancing, and then again into the scene changes. So you, I think, are able to condense time a little bit more, and on a regional theater rehearsal schedule, that's very important. But you are also able to stamp your vision and your thought process on every aspect of the production, which is exciting. However, I also love working as a choreographer. I've worked for Bob as a choreographer. He's a great director, and I relish the moments that I get to learn from my colleagues. So they're both really wonderful things, just two different approaches.
Rem, I'm going to pick it up with you here now. You not only have the Tony from Memphis, you have a pair of Tonys. This is not your only Tony. You have three. You have three Tonys. Thank you. And could you, for those of us who aren't Broadway producers, could you tell a little bit about what does a Broadway producer do? What are your responsibilities? How do you get to be a Broadway producer? Just help us understand your world a little bit.
Well, it can be a really wonderful world when you have a hit show like Memphis. My other Tony Awards were for War Horse, which just finished a successful run in Tokyo, Japan. It is now an international production. And then a hilarious English comedy called The Norman Conquest, which has nothing to do with William the Conqueror. It's about a man named Norman and his romantic conquests. Anyway, I got into this business through a playwright whose work I admired, and I wanted to know more about the business. It was only 5 or 6 years ago, but he introduced me to the lead producers of Memphis, and they're the ones who really brought me in, changed my life, and let me be part of the creative process and to go out and help to capitalize the show, to sell it. And that's what producers do. We find a property that we think has a great chance of success, which has a message, which will do well on Broadway, become a brand like Wicked or something. Should everyone be so lucky? But I enjoy meeting the people in this business. I enjoy going to regional theaters across America and overseas and meeting the theatrical community in those places. It's a fascinating world. The flip side are the losses. And really only 1 in 5 Broadway shows is a commercial success. It's a very tough, competitive business. I've been lucky and I've been unlucky. There's no crystal ball. You hope for the best, and sometimes it all comes together like it did with Memphis. Thank you.
So, so you know, one thing I want to distinguish, you mentioned about the show being developed at La Jolla Playhouse, also at North Shore before that. And this is an important point to make for those of us who live here in Little Rock and are supporters of regional theater. You know, Broadway, as Rem was just mentioning, is a for-profit business. It is engaged to make investors money, and as Rem said, it is an incredibly risky business. So the men and women who invest in Broadway are taking a real risk to further our art form. And to that, we are all indebted. And we want to make a distinction between theaters where Memphis was developed, like North Shore and like the La Jolla Playhouse in San Diego. These are nonprofit theaters, just like Arkansas Rep. These are regional LORT theaters, just like Arkansas Rep. A lot of the shows, particularly the big musicals, that end up on Broadway start in the nonprofits. And that's one of the sort of, I wouldn't say central, but one of the increasingly defining characteristics of our larger nonprofits. Because when La Jolla can send a show like Memphis to Broadway, La Jolla makes a lot of money. You can go all the way back to when the Public Theater, one of New York City's nonprofit theaters, created a little show called A Chorus Line. And that has been funding the Public Theater for a long, long time. But we want to make sure that we understand the difference between the for-profit world of Broadway, where shows sink or swim on their ability to sell tickets, and the nonprofit world where a lot of these kind of shows are developed. You might remember last year, the Rep did a musical called Because of Winn-Dixie, which is still, now is at another, it'll be at another LORT theater this spring, and geographically closer to New York, and is slowly and hopefully moving its way to New York, but it had its first premiere here. Usually a show will be seen at 2 or 3 different regional theaters, changing radically all the time as it makes its way to a commercial world. Some shows never make their way to the commercial world, but some do. And you were mentioning, Rem, that this is a risky business. If somebody had, you know, some spare change lying around, would you recommend they become Broadway producers or Broadway investors?
I would not. We're looking for people who believe in theater and, frankly, who can afford to invest in theater. It's a rare breed, but they're out there, and you see them on opening nights. You see them coming to rehearsals. You see them loving every minute of it. But it just gets in your blood. And I want to say one thing about this production in Little Rock. This show is going to get in your blood because we have these superb actors. Wait till you see their performances. They have totally brought this show to life on a new stage in a new city, and I just couldn't be prouder. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Rimmel. Thank you. Marvin, let me turn it over to you here. Could you help us understand, you talked a little bit about the sort of the music scene. You said something interesting last night talking about people purchasing radios and being able to, how is technology changing? How is the world changing? That sort of, it almost looks like a perfect storm of music and the ability to access that music. Early days of television, etc. Can you help us understand that framework for this musical a little bit?
Okay. The period, of course, is Jim Crow South, and it's not a good time for African Americans, and it's not a high point of American civil rights heritage. I mean, there's some violent crimes going on across the landscape in the South. It's not a pleasant period. But there are large displacements of populations at this time. People are leaving the land and moving, many of them from Arkansas and the Mississippi area, went to Chicago, Detroit, Flint, Michigan to work in the car factories. Others went to California to find jobs. A lot of people just stayed here and made the best of it that they can. Many of them moved to cities. So the cities are getting more populated. And with the cities is a new development in American culture, cars and highways. And so getting in your car and cruising along on a city street is an act of freedom, an act of exhilaration, which finds its way into song. And some of the early great songs are Rocket 88 by black musicians who came to Memphis to sing about being free in this urban environment that was very suppressive, because in these black communities, these guys and women are working very hard, and they're on the streets at night in juke joints and clubs. A proliferation of clubs on Little Rock's 9th Street was an example of that. Memphis was 5 times or more greater than that. And in these clubs, musicians are coming out to play and entertain their peer groups they're working, they have money in their pockets. It's a tough world out there, but in the clubs they can have some fun and some freedom. And that voice becomes very, very transmittable through new radio stations like WDAI, new radios in homes across the landscape. People are replacing their battery-powered radios with electrical power now is coming to the homes. Out of Newport, where our story is located. And by the way, the Rimmel family and the Butler family have long ties to Newport, and the relationship between Memphis and this town of Newport is remarkable because it was only 90 miles from Memphis, and the performers could get there and back late in the morning after a show. And black performers had their own circuit and their own streets and their own clubs. And this was all coming onto the airwaves. There were separate stations, of course, for black and white music. There were separate charts at the Billboard listings. They were first called race records, then they were called crossover records. Then it became rhythm and blues. And artists that played hardcore rock and roll, rockabilly, Carl Perkins and others, some of their records appeared on the black charts, and black artists their records appeared on the white charts. Things were changing in the music, leading this social change. On the streets and in the country, there was still some very, very severe resistance, and made it difficult and dangerous at times to bridge those barriers, such as Dewey Phillips did.
And Lynn, let me ask you a question about this production of Memphis, which the undercurrent of the world, the undercurrent of the South, the political undercurrent, is always present, although rarely overt in this musical, which is really a more personal story. In your rehearsal process with the cast and with the creative team, did you pull in conversations about the tension that's kind of embodied by the relationship between Huey and Felicia? Which is kind of a touchstone for bigger issues. But is that backdrop a part of this story? I noticed when I saw the Arkansas Times article, a preview, they said that was the headline, was that we unfold this sort of racial story. How did that play into the rehearsal process?
Well, I think both Brent and Jasmine can also speak to that. But yes, indeed, we did discuss, I think it's a very important issue. I think it is still present today. We discussed our show in context of Ferguson, because although we have come eons, we have come nowhere near as far as we need to. I started off our first read-through, or my first meeting with the cast, by reading poetry from Langston Hughes, who made commentary for, I believe, 5 decades. And much of his poetry applied to this show and still applies to the way we live today. And for me, where I hope we will get in the future. I love Memphis, and it's interesting, Brent and I have talked because we have similarities to Huey. When I was born in 1955, so I wasn't, old enough in the 50s to see this in the 50s, but I was a product of the 60s, where the civil rights came to a head. And I lived in a neighborhood in Buffalo, New York, in the 716, and what I danced to was Black music. That is what moved me. That is where I have always felt at home. And I watched around me the civil rights movement as I was a teenager. So I feel very strongly. We also talked about how, and to me, this is the essence of the show, art, and in this particular case it is the music, but how art can bring people together and make you see one another from the soul and from the heart, and not look at each other with external eyes. And we talked about Sammy Davis Jr.'s journey with his colleague Frank Sinatra, who used music and art to fight for civil rights. So there are ways to come together and to really see one another from the inside out. And to me, that is the essence of Memphis. That is Felicia and Huey's story. That is definitely Huey's point of view. And hopefully where we can be as people, that strip away what's above the surface, look at what's under the surface, and we find that we are all the same.
Now, you mentioned, Lynn, that as a girl growing up in Buffalo, you danced to Black music.
Absolutely.
That dancing that you were doing in the 50s, do we see any of it on stage in this show?
Indeed we do. I have always been a researcher ever since I lived in the library when I was a kid, and I wanted to be a librarian before I discovered theater. I actually taught myself how to dance out of books. So anyway, yes, I have... I have thoroughly researched this. As a matter of fact, most of the dancing that is of our popular culture and attached to music comes from an African base. So I actually went back and did research into like the Watusi tribe, watched classical videos that were filmed in Africa, and you can see the direct lineage of every single one of the dances that you will see on stage. And it's exciting. We have a great company of dancers. Come see them, they're hot.
Yeah, I would say, having watched the evolution of 15 years of theater on the rep stage, the choreography and the dancing in this production is particularly stellar. And we always have good choreography, but the ensemble of dancers is so strong that allows Lynn to really go even deeper, go that extra mile in challenging those dancers. Who are everybody in the cast gets into that act through the course of the show, and that's really one of the takeaways. And you get many wonderful things at the rep when you come and see a show and a musical. You don't always get a takeaway of amazing dance, but you do in this production. Let's open it up for questions. What would you guys like to know? Yes, sir. And they're going to bring you a mic, and they'll want you to talk right into it.
I have a question for Marvin. In your Rocket 88 story, you mentioned Dewey Phillips and Sam Phillips and how they got together. Were they related to each other with the same last name, and did that relationship help move the story along?
To the best of my knowledge, they were not related, although Rimmel spoke of them as cousins.
Well, Tom on the film
Tom
spoke of them as cousins.
I think that's incorrect. The research says Sam Phillips came out of Florence, Alabama. He was the one of 12 children of sharecropper families. He was a remarkable story, very much like the people he recorded. He came from the land. Dewey Phillips was a city boy from Memphis, and they were not related.
But they did work. They knew each other.
Well,
they had a working relationship.
Absolutely, because Sam produced the masters, the acetates, and Dewey was the way to get them on the air. And you would bring your record to the DJ. the artists would carry their records around. This was not payola. This was you go pay a visit to the DJ, give him the record, talk with him, get on the air, and they worked very closely. So when Elvis cut this That's All Right Mama, when it was ready to present, they brought it immediately to Dewey Phillips, and as you heard, he played it and the phones went crazy and they fell. So they worked hand in glove.
Which is represented, again, another part of the story that has its kernel of truth. The idea of the artist bringing the record to the DJ is part of the Memphis musical, too. Yes, sir. Oh, yes.
Hi, this is to Brent. When I was in California a couple of years ago, almost by accident, I was watching Arts and Entertainment, and Memphis was being presented on TV. I was particularly enamored with your character and his affectations of dancing with his hand and his leg.
So am I.
And it reminded me a little bit of one of the characters in Rent who does the same kind of thing. Can you tell me how you learned that and how what you do is equivalent to what Dewey Phillips really did with those hand and leg movements that are just fantastic?
I think that all of those movements or are physicalizations of what the music does to someone's soul. And I don't think that you can copy it. I'll never do the same thing that Huey Phillips did in a studio because that music hit him in a certain way that, that I can't replicate myself. But what I can do is listen to this music that is also very close to my heart and physicalize that in my way, which is, I can guarantee you, is just as ridiculous. So, this music has a big impact on everyone, and music is a seed to me in which branches everything. Rhythm and blues is rock and roll. Rock and roll is rhythm and blues in that you hear dun 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 dun, that's rock and roll, but if you slow it down and go dun 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 dun, that's rhythm and blues. You can go, that's all right with mama, or you can go, that's all right with mama. That's totally different. That's a different song. But two people did it different ways. So in movement, you also can express that. So.
Yes.
I want to thank all of you for bringing this presentation. I still have a 1957 WHBQ Top 40 framed by my desk. The #1 tune, by the way, was Blue Suede Shoes. I wanted to ask, you mentioned the process of tweaking the production and getting it ready for Broadway. But now that it has been on Broadway and is traveling, the changes that you as a director make to adapt it to this stage and this cast, does the producer continue to be a part of that process? And how does that affect the actors as you're changing things for everyone, for all of you?
I'll let Rem start and then take it to...
I'll begin and say, I'm a guest in this production, and a very fortunate guest. It is Lynn's creative vision that has brought Memphis to Little Rock, but they have very graciously included me in the process. I've been to the auditions in New York, I've been to the rehearsals, and I do feel a part of it, and I appreciate it more than I can say. Thank you.
Lynn, why don't you pick up on that question?
Well, first of all, I have to say that Rem has just been amazingly supportive, and we have loved having him in the room every time he's there. It's a wonderful, wonderful spirit, and I thank you for producing this show, which I love so, so much, and also for Warhorse, which is another whole story as far as one of the best theatrical experiences of my life. Anyway, anytime that you do a show that is not what we would call a replica production, so in other words, if a national tour goes out, it is usually a replica production, utilizing the work of the original director and choreographer, sometimes with those people on board or their representatives, as in a dance captain or an assistant choreographer, assistant director. But when you do regional theater, you do you have the open slate of being able to create your own production. So costumes are different, your scenic elements are different. Certainly any cast that you bring in is going to influence the decisions you make, but the script and score have been created and locked down by the original creators. So your dance music and your dance breaks are the same. There are certain things that have worked into the script from a directorial perspective that are now action that are connected to the words. And you cannot change any of the words. You cannot change any of the music by adding or cutting or changing, orchestration, and you cannot change any of the lyrics. But as far as how you bring those to life, that is up to you. And certainly, there are obeisance moments. There are certain iconic pictures of Memphis with Huey on his knees to Felicia that you do embrace in your own fashion. But I guess Rimmel can tell you, I hope he can tell you, that we're not doing the Broadway production.
It is, there's a lot of curiosity about this show up in New York. And some Broadway producers are flying in tonight to be here for opening night. But
No pressure.
But truly, the actors, as in Brent and Jasmine, as Brent and Jasmine, they are phenomenal. And every single performer in this company has brought their own spin to their characters. And that, as a director, for me, has been so influential. My designers, every single designer at the Rep is phenomenal. Well, you just have to come see it to see everything that they input influences what I choose to do. And then Bob, as the artistic director of the theater, always has input, which is spectacular, and so we create our own version. I do not know if that answered the question, but I'm done talking.
it's not a carbon copy of Broadway. The music and the dialogue is the same, but the staging, and I think the chemistry on stage is always different when you have new actors, and it's particularly good in this show.
Hey, Rem, what was the budget for Memphis on Broadway? What was the capitalization for that show?
Around $10 million.
Yeah. So when you ask about the difference,
What is the budget of this production?
about 300,000. So there's a few zeros difference between the 10 million that all the producers raised to produce the show on Broadway and the Rep's budget. We could run for 2.5 years on the budget of Memphis on Broadway. And so one of our opportunities is to tell this story, to bring this story to life within our means, but also marshaling all of our collective creative resources to bring in wonderful actors and directors and designers who can tell this story in a way that you will enjoy, that will bring our community to life, will bring Main Street to life. But really, of course, the challenge that we face is that every decision we make is driven by budgetary considerations. Just like every nonprofit in the country. We answer to a board of directors, many of whom are here in this room, so I have to say all these things. We adhere strictly to a budget that we create and our board approves. And there are always small variables. Life always throws you curveballs, and you react to them. Our job is to bring the story to life on our stage in as excellent a way as possible. But you never lose sight of the fact that when you see a show on Broadway and you're paying the Broadway prices, you are seeing a show where I don't think you can bring a musical to Broadway for less than $10 million, really.
8 would be very
right. And if you're creating Spider-Man, you're spending $75 million. You're losing $75 million.
Because that show is not as good as Memphis.
Not really, not at all.
But I think that one of the things that I think is demonstrated by that comment is, it's always about the money, and it's never about the money. It's always about investing, and it's also always about the art. You have a wonderful combination when a show like Memphis, those two things come together. Other questions? Yes. She's going to bring you a mic.
I'm Catherine Melhorn, and I'm on the board of the Rep. And you directed my son in The Who's Tommy several years ago.
And he was wonderful.
Well, and you influenced him, and he's a sophomore at Point Park University.
Amazing. One of the best programs in the country.
Thank you. So is Elon. Question for you, and this is, by being on the board, I have learned so much about the workings of theater. You will leave after opening night because directors leave. Is that correct?
That's true. The director and/or choreographer usually leave after opening night or shortly thereafter when you're on the faculty of a university and your classes are waiting for you.
Yes. But if there was a separate choreographer on the staff, would they normally stay through the run?
Sometimes the choreographer might also be in the company, like Marissa Kirby has choreographed and will also dance in the show. So that person would stay. You do also have, of course, resident directors like Bob directs shows, and so he is here in Arkansas and at the theater, and he would stay. So it's not like they kick you out,
right?
But usually you're a journeyman in theater, and so you're on to the next job, especially if you're a director choreographer. The actors, their job sort of begins with opening night, their longevity of the job, but with a director choreographer, your job finishes with opening night. You leave it in the hands of your stage manager, your dance captain, and then you're usually on to another rehearsal.
And that's how it works at the Rep and how it works in every regional theater. After opening night, the show is really run by the stage manager. And if there are issues that come up, it's the stage manager's responsibility to bring them to my attention. Every night, the stage manager writes a report of the performance. And there are the mechanics, the logistics of various times and what, at 7:03 this happened, at 7:05 this happened. But the stage manager also writes a commentary. Like when we were reading the report from last night, this prop didn't function as planned, this thing didn't function as planned, and then also she will document the audience reaction, sometimes song by song. The audience reacted in this way, this was sustained for this long, so that those of us who might not have been there, like the director or myself, can have a very thorough analysis of what happened in the show that night and how the audience responded and how things worked backstage. If somebody was injured, we know about it. If somebody's sick, we know about it. And so from those reports, we know, and the stage manager usually takes care of 99% of anything that comes up. But then the stage manager might come to me and say, I need a little help with this or that, and we'll talk about that. We might bring the director into that conversation. But it's very typical. Like, for instance, when I directed Les Mis here at the Rep and then in Phoenix, opening night was a Friday night. I was on a plane at 7 a.m. Saturday morning, and I didn't go back. I didn't hear a word about the production after it opened. I didn't even see the reviews.
The one time that I was contacted by phone and had to be very involved in reconstructing was 9/11. I had just opened a production of West Side Story at Tennessee Repertory Theater in Nashville, and it was the Monday, which is often a travel day for actors. And so much of our company was stranded. Fortunately, everyone was safe, but people were stranded and you couldn't even get a rental car. So we had to do some major reconstructing of the show with the people that were still in Nashville. That was the only time I have physically been called on the phone and had to be very, very involved, was because that was a horrific national disaster. But other than that, they usually send you the report and you see things are just fine.
Other questions? Let her get the microphone there, so.
Were you influenced by some of the dances of other productions, or did all the choreography just come from your research and your soul?
I would have to say that I try to do my own original work always, but once again, there is a score and sort of a storyline that gets woven into the script. So where dances are placed in the story they need to tell, you definitely are influenced by what has come before, much in the same way, West Side Story must have a rumble and a prologue, and Oklahoma has your dream ballet, and there are certain storytelling elements that have to happen within the number. Does that answer the question?
You have one more question back there.
Mr. Swartz, you are indeed a writer. Your correlation between driving and freedom was spot on. I remember the sensation, but never characterized it as such. When I thought about coming here, I never thought I'd hear the name Newport associated with Memphis. I saw it as agricultural and one of the mosquito havens of Arkansas. Everybody I ever met from Newport was from Newport. Could you speak a little bit about the connection between Newport, the musical connection between Newport and Memphis, if that is in fact the right way to phrase that question?
I'm glad to. Newport was a center for the entertainers from Memphis to find high-paying jobs. They paid them better in Newport than they did in Little Rock and in Memphis. And we're talking mostly about the young white rockabilly guys, but some of the black entertainers as well. And the reason they paid well in Newport was because it was a wealthy agricultural community, and there were gambling dens in the back of most of the clubs. And so having to deal with a large influx of cash every day, these club owners could bring in high-profile acts. The biggest club in Newport was the Silver Moon, which could seat 800, maybe 1,000 people seating, and had a marquee out front, home to famous bands. And so the Temptations played there, Fats Domino played there, to all white audiences, unfortunately, and then they had their own clubs. But Newport was 90 miles from Memphis. The road was paved in 1951. Sid McMath, our governor, was at the opening of the ceremony, and the people could get back and forth, and particularly the entertainers. Young men in their early 20s had finished a show at 1, 2, 3 in the morning. They wouldn't go right back to Memphis. They'd stop in Brinkley and play at a black club till 3 or 4 in the morning. Then they'd stop at another club and maybe have another drink and gamble a little bit. And they'd get home the next morning. They wouldn't have to spend the night on the road. So it was the geographical proximity, and not just Newport, but in Arkansas, as you may know, there's Highway 67 through the Northeast Corridor, where lots of clubs in black and white communities attracted the talent from Memphis. Well, the air base was in the 40s, and that infused quite a bit of capital and personality to the region. What we're talking about is Army Air Corps training sites that were built across the Delta. There were 7 of them: Walnut Ridge, Newport, Stuttgart, other places. And these were instant cities. And so you had young men with cash in their pockets. They were flyers. They were arrogant. They were competent young men. They wanted to party when they weren't on the base.